You remember in my last video how I brought up having to chase the algorithm and I hated it and I didn't want to do it anymore? Yeah, well, this is a video about biscuits because you guys are right. You come here for fun. You come here for weird history that you don't hear anywhere else. So yes, this is a video about biscuits, whether you like it or not. But these biscuits, well, if you call them a cookie, they can send you to prison. The Anzac biscuit is an iconic food item in Australia and New Zealand, and they hold a special place in the hearts of both nations. Their smell being instantly distinguishable and quite possibly the greatest thing since sliced bread. These heavenly scent from every single deity at once, oat-based golden circles of happiness trace their origins back to the First World War. But make no mistake, these little gems are the centre of mass controversy and legal red tape. But how does an oat biscuit mean so much to two countries all at once that there are genuine laws that are enforced to defend it? Well, I'm glad you asked, because in this video we're going to go over the history of the humble Anzac Bicky. Now, for those who don't know, the term Anzac stands for the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. In simplest terms, it was the name given to the initial group of soldiers from Australia and New Zealand who travelled to Europe to fight alongside British forces during the First World War. I actually made a bit of a video about them already recently. It was about the sinking the Kaiser's pirate, because it was on this convoy that the HMAS Sydney scored Australia's first naval victory, defending the Anzacs and the wireless station at Cocos Island. The Anzacs today are arguably the most famous for their involvement in the Gallipoli campaign in 1915, which, although a military failure, became a defining moment in the national consciousness of both Australia and New Zealand. There is a lot to be said about the fact that these two nations celebrated defeat as their defining moment, rather than any of the number of victories that they later scored in the war. The hardships faced by the soldiers in Gallipoli were genuinely horrific and highlighted by the extreme heat, cold, death from combat, and above all, disease. In this hellscape, the Anzacs had little to look forward to, their diets consisting of bully beef and dirty water, sometimes mixed together into a sludgy stew with hardtack biscuits. Not entirely the most appealing if you ask me, and I've eaten Russian military rations. Meanwhile, back in Australia and New Zealand, the soldiers and families and communities, while not entirely aware of how bad things really were thanks to a hefty dose of propaganda, understood that the boys were living a hard life, and to try and help them they wanted to send them some kind of comforts from home, be it a photo of a sweetheart covered in perfume, or a pair of knitted socks, or some sugary happy treat. But, and there's a big but, the boys were in Gallipoli, a world away from their homeland, and the long and perilous journey to the war front meant that perishable goods were off the cards for shipping, because goods from home, while important for morale, weren't considered that important for keeping the war going when you compare it to things like ammunition, understandably so. So all these factors together, and the fact that Australia's, kind of warm, meant that only unperishable foods could be sent. And on that, it only had to be food that was easy to transport. And this is where the Anzac biscuit was born. And yes, I stress biscuit because it's genuinely illegal to call them cookies. The first iterations of Anzac biscuits weren't as sweet or soft as the versions we know today. They were basic, hearty, and utilitarian. Think of it like a hardtack that was actually edible and tasted nice. The ingredients that were chosen for their long shelf life and their ability to withstand the journey to the front through heat, cold, and, well, the vibration and misery of being at sea at the time for a long period. The original recipes contained simple ingredients like rolled oats, sugar, flour, coconut, butter, and baking soda, as well as, crucially, golden syrup, a type of thick syrup derived from sugarcane, and this is a crop that dominates Australia, particularly in places like Queensland, and also there are parts of northern New South Wales. The biscuits were typically sent by families, often baked at home, put into care packages to sustain their loved ones during their time in the trenches. And they would be sent alongside other accompaniments like I mentioned. Like, one of the big things that was scented was knitted goods. And this was showed off very well in the mini-series that Australia created to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the campaign called Gallipoli. Really recommend it. You can watch the whole mini-series online for free. But in this series, one of the main characters, and the main characters are fictional, but they're based loosely on real people, called Cliffy, receives a pair of green and purple socks from his mum. Everyone has a joke, but he's seen proudly wearing them, because it's a gift from home. It keeps the morale up, keeps you happy, keeps you sane. and alongside packages like that, these biscuits would be given. But they weren't just beneficial to morale, there was so much more to them. See, the fact that they were made through things like oats and golden syrup, well, as a binding agent that is, it brought together key parts of nutrition that were missing from the soldiers' diets, such as basically everything that wasn't salted bully beef and dirty water. If you actually want to see what original Anzac biscuits look like, I really recommend checking out Tasting History's video on it. Max does the biggie justice, and he genuinely is also just a really nice person, because I've been talking to him briefly about how to make Egyptian beer, which I'm still doing. I was going to do it over Christmas, but I'm still doing. And he's genuinely such a nice guy. So just, yeah, seriously, if you want to see what the biscuit looks like in its original pure form, check out his channel. I'll link it in the description. Now, the making and sending of Anzac biscuits wasn't just a mum and pop thing at home, as you Yanks would refer to it. It was part of a broader effort by the home front to support the war from both nations. See, Australia and New Zealand were newcomers to the world stage at this point in history, with Australia only being 14 years old as its recognised unified state of Australia. It is said that before the 25th of April 1915, Australians were just Britons who lived abroad. But after that day, when our flag for the first time was taken ashore by our young men under fire, Australia was truly born as a nation. A similar story can be very well seen in New Zealand. See, the Gallipoli campaign was truly a formative event for both countries. We entered the war as far-flung outposts of the Empire. We left it as nations. And the hardships endured by the soldiers and the sacrifices made by their families created a deep sense of national pride and unity that is still felt today. And the humble Anzac biscuit became and still exists as a direct connection to the past. Now, on that, I need to reinforce that the casualty rate in the First World War was so high for these two nations which had such small populations that every single family was affected. There was nobody who got away from it without losing a loved one, be it a brother, a husband, a family friend, someone they cared about died or came very close to it in that war. Nobody got away scot-free. My great-great-uncle died at La Hamel and he's buried in Villebretonner. In the desk of the chair that I'm sitting at right now recording, I hold the medals of a paternal relative as well, who somehow made it through the war unscathed, but saw some horrific things in France. Every family was affected by this war, and the scars are still very well seen across the nation. The logistical challenges at the time, though, were significant, as I mentioned, and the home fronts of Australia and New Zealand were actually adapting to what would be considered a wartime economy, and this meant producing and conserving resources. Food was a big factor, which could obviously be sent to the soldiers, because you see, the thing is, while Britain was under blockade from the U-boats, the rest of the British Empire needed to maintain food to eat, and Australia was a net exporter of food. It still is to this day. Ergo, the produce that was coming out of Australia couldn't all be given to the Australian soldiers who were abroad. In fact, it needed to be given as much as it could to them, of course, but also to the rest of the empire, and to be there as a way to alleviate the blockade of the U-boat. With all this going on, it can be pretty easy to see how these biscuits serve as a reminder for these soldiers of the love and support of those who they left behind. And despite its simplicity, the act of sending them became a significant gesture, represented the ongoing connection between soldiers and their families, and the biscuits were small, but meaningful in a way to bridge the gap between the front lines and the home front. And the images of soldiers receiving these care packages containing the biscuits is now a powerful symbol of wartime solidarity, and the biscuit itself has come to represent not just the food, but the bonds of community and national identity. It wasn't just the individual parents and families that made these biscuits and sent them, it became a community event. And now this is what you're all here for, the legality surrounding the name. And this is actually something that I have seen online referred to as an example of why Australia is a draconian state, and I find that quite hilarious. See, the term Anzac biscuit has been the subject of extreme legal controversy in recent years, both in Australia and New Zealand. See, the term Anzac itself is legally protected due to its significance to the birth of the nation's national identities. I want you to consider it like, for the example for you Yanks out there, because you do make up the majority of my audience, this is as if someone went out and shot a bald eagle for fun. The bald eagle is a symbol of your nation and your nation's state. It's something that's very near and dear to the core national identity of your nation, at least it was meant to be. It's a symbol of what you would call freedom, naturally. The term Anzac, it's a symbol that means something very, very deep in the spirit of Australia. It's something that stands for mateship, camaraderie, and many, many other factors that I can't really put into words that do it justice. And because of that term's importance, certain steps have been taken to destroy any attempts to commercialize it or turn it into a brand, and its use is restricted in order to preserve the integrity of the term, which is deeply linked today to not only the sacrifice and spirit of those who served in the First World War, but now we have extended it to those who have died in all wars. The laws that apply to the protection of Anzac will actually apply to this video that you are listening to. If I were to start cracking horrific jokes, or to make a mockery of it, I would be subject to legal action by the Department of Veterans Affairs for making a mockery of the term Anzac. As a result of all of this, and the importance of the term, the use of the name Anzac on food products is completely prohibited unless they meet certain criteria, and this is governed by the federal government in Australia under the Department of Veterans Affairs, or DVA for short. Other institutions such as the Australian War Memorial and other heritage bodies strictly regulate the use of the term Anzac to ensure that it is not used frivolously or commercially. This means that any biscuit or food product marketed as Anzac biscuits must adhere to the spirit of the recipe that was originally sent to the soldiers in the First World War. Now, of course, the recipe has been evolved over time, and I will actually include the legally mandated recipe for Anzac biscuits in the comments. I'll pin it, because I recommend you go and make these beautiful little treats, because they are gorgeous little biscuits, and have them with a cup of tea or a coffee. They are delicious. And it's a bit of history as well, so what's not to love? But in 2007, the issue was actually brought to light when a company in the United Kingdom began marketing products as Anzac biscuits, despite the fact that the biscuit that they were marketing was completely different from the original recipe. As a result, the Australian federal government stepped in through our ambassadors, spoke to the United Kingdom at the High Commission, and resolved to reinforce the rules protecting the use of the term. See, although there is a lot of propaganda surrounding the fact that Britain doesn't care about the sacrifice the colonies made, oh, it's just the colonials, the United Kingdom has tremendous respect for the sacrifices made by Australian and New Zealand soldiers during the First and Second World War. This is very evidently visible if you go and visit London. There are multiple memorials to the sacrifices of both nations. So when the Australian government reached out and said, hey, this company is making a mockery of our past, when we helped you guys out in those horrific wars, the UK acted immediately, and it does act immediately, because it is part of a shared combined trauma that has binded us together as not so much brother nations, but as now what we would consider in many ways the grown-up child who has moved out of the parents' house in many, many ways to describe it. That's actually the way that the British ambassador recently described it to Australia. In New Zealand, the situation is largely similar. The Kiwi government, through the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, regulates the term Anzac, ensuring that it is only used in a context that appropriately honours its legacy. Now, this has led to debates over whether it is right to continue calling the modern-day biscuit an Anzac biscuit in New Zealand, considering there are some significant differences between the original recipe and today's version. Today's is a little sweeter, for example. Despite this, the use of the term Anzac in connection with the biscuits remains completely widespread, largely due to the cultural and historical importance of the name. And yes, you can be sent to prison. Most likely you'll just be fined, but there are certain ways that you can be sent to prison if you do disparage and make a mockery of the term. Yes, related to the biscuit as well, not just the name Anzac. So, if you haven't picked it yet, Anzac biscuits are far more than just a food item. They are a symbol of national pride, remembrance, and sacrifice. In Australia and New Zealand, Anzac Day, April 25th, the day this video comes out, is a day of solemn reflection, during which the nations stand together as one to remember those who served in wars and conflicts. It is a day to honour not just the soldiers who fought at Gallipoli, but those who served in wars since then. I can't stress this enough just how unified our two nations are on this day. We stand completely together, we sing each other's national anthems at the top of our lungs, the crowd joins in for both, be it at the dawn services held on this day to commemorate the time of day that the Anzacs actually landed at Gallipoli, or at the footy or at the pub. On that day, the nations are truly one. For example, on that day there will be an AFL game between Collingwood, and Essendon. Those teams will play after both Australia and New Zealand have their national anthems rung out in front of a crowd of 100,000 people at the MCG. The act of baking and sharing Anzac biscuits has become a meaningful tradition in both countries on Anzac Day. Many people bake them as part of personal remembrance rituals, be it for a family member who passed away, or for a grandparent who had served previously, where the Anzac spirit was a significant part of their culture growing up. Schools will also bake them as part of a student remembrance. Communities, veterans organisations such as the Return Services League or RSL, they will often hold baking events to raise awareness of the sacrifices made by the Anzacs, and also, of course, all soldiers, sailors and airmen since. The biscuits have become a way of linking the past with the present, allowing people to remember the sacrifices of the soldiers, but also the nurses, and really the whole nation during this time of war. It is a symbol of not only us in war and us at conflict, but of our national identity and our culture, while engaging in a tradition that has been passed down through generation after generation. In addition to Anzac Day, Anzac biscuits have also become a way for people to celebrate and preserve the history of the nations throughout the year. Every single grocery store year-round, I guarantee you, will have them in stock. I can go to Coles or Woolworths, our two main chains of groceries, and I can buy a 20-pack of Anzac biscuits, not for too much money. They will always be in stock. The story of the biscuits is told in classrooms. I first learnt about it, for example, when I was probably 6 or 7 in year 1 or year 2. See, Anzac biscuits are more than just a traditional treat, they are a living symbol of Anzac spirit, a spirit of resilience, sacrifice, unity, mateship, and these ideals and values are that of which the modern nations of Australia and New Zealand are built on today. These values are exposed directly in our national anthems, such as the lines in the Australian national anthem that read, "Beneath our radiant Southern Cross, we will toil with hearts and hands." These values and their origins lay in both the tremendous self-sacrifice of the young boys on the beaches and the hills, but also in the resourcefulness of families who sought to support their loved ones during the hardships of the First World War. And over time the recipe has evolved, but the connection between the biscuits and the Anzac soldiers has remained strong. And the legacy of the biscuit is not just about food, it's about that enduring spirit. And this is one of the important ways that we can look through history and see how food and culture come together to shape history and to shape national identity. See, we don't thank our soldiers for their service here. If anything, saying thank you for your service to a digger is likely to get you punched square in the nose. And I know if you say it to 2 of my mates, they will absolutely give you a dead arm for it. But we hold our history in high regard. And so on April 25th, consider baking a batch of these biscuits. Have a gunfire breakfast of steak sandwiches and sausages at 5 AM in the morning. Or better yet, go down to the local pub where it's completely legal to gamble in public for 1 day a year, playing 2-up just like our ancestors did before us. The reason I personally love the history of these biscuits and the reason I've made the video, well, is to show you an example of healthy nationalism and national pride, a thing that has been sadly lost today in so many spaces. You don't need to cut another country down, to cut another guy down to be proud of yourself, to be proud of your nation's history. You don't have to stand and call everyone out while standing behind your symbols of state saying you are better than everyone because you exist. You don't need to be exceptional in every single way in your own belief while the rest of the world laughs at you trying to figure out what you're doing. You can be proud of yourself without putting someone down, and you can share that pride with a brother nation who has stood side by side with you throughout the centuries and who will never, ever be anything less than your sibling. See, there's a bit of a joke that Australians and New Zealanders will rip into each other non-stop, and we absolutely will. But God forbid you try and insult one of the others to the other. So thank you for sitting through a video on biscuits where I rant about nationalism and national identity again because I can't help myself. Like I said, I will include the recipe of the biscuit in the description and the pinned comment. So really have a look. They're genuinely very easy to make. Super, super simple to make. I recommend taking them out of the oven a little bit earlier, then let them cool down so you get a nice gooey center for chewiness and you get a crunchy outside. So, so good. But gooey center Anzac biscuits, best kind of Anzac biscuits, especially when they're warm and you can have them with a cup of tea. But on that, this video has come out on April 25th. So let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a very important day. Be it you going to the march, be it you are a serving member of the ADF or NZDF, and you are watching this video, I'm not going to thank you for your service because that's not what we do, but I hope you have a good one today. Lest we forget.